Welcome back to Quick Questions for Lent. We'll start with Ashley today.
What is my favorite parable and why? Really simply, it is the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. I like putting myself in the shoes of every person in that story in different seasons of life, and I think that's why it's my favorite.
Luke chapter 21, disciples ask Jesus about the end times. That's how they put it. And Jesus predicts some things. What Jesus is actually predicting is not the end of the entire world or all of creation. He's actually predicting the end of the temple in Jerusalem. He actually names the specific temple being destroyed, which actually did happen in the year 70 AD when the Roman Empire finally overthrew Jerusalem.
In Luke chapter 20, Jesus has some things to say about marriage in the afterlife. And it seems like he's saying there's not going to be marriage. Does that mean there's not going to be family? There's not going to be relationships? The Bible actually tells us very little about what life is like after we die. Jesus is the one person we know, have an example. And what we know about Jesus is there's some things about him that were similar to what his resurrected body was similar in some ways to his body before the resurrection. And in some ways it was different. So what I would say is we'll still have, they recognize Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration. There's going to be recognition, but it's going to be different. And primarily Jesus' point is it's going to be better.
Yeah. Flipping to the Old Testament, in 1 Samuel 10, there's some weird stuff that Samuel instructs Saul to do before he's anointed king. Why does he have to do all of this stuff? I really don't have a good answer for why he has to do all of these things. What I do know is that Jesus, Jesus instructs his disciples to do some things before the Last Supper. Go into a town, find these things at these specific houses. It's reflected in the New Testament, and I just find that super fascinating.
Still in 1 Samuel 15, the question is, why wasn't God willing to forgive Saul, but instead wanted to pick a new king? I think what this points to is it's less about Saul as more as it is God telling Samuel before Saul was even king that God was supposed to be king of his people. And as soon as you pick a king, that king is going to rule over you in ways that God wouldn't have. And so what we see through Saul and David and Solomon and this kingly procession through the history of Israel is the consequences of the people choosing authority figures other than God himself. So I think God is always willing to forgive everyone for anything. We see that through Jesus Christ. But we also fall into the consequences of our own decisions, and the people of Israel chose a king, and then they got what they asked for.
That lines up really well with my question. 1 Samuel chapter 8, it's not a good idea to have a king, and yet Samuel tells the people, God says you can go ahead and have a king besides God. Why? And this is who we see God being over and over again. Even think of the story of the prodigal son. Why does the father in that story, who represents God, give half of his money and wealth to his son so his son can go squander it in the first place? But what we see is God is very permissive. Here's the best, here's the ideal, and if you want to go another way, you sure can. There will be consequences, and I will always be waiting here with love and grace and connection and relationship when you figure out the better way.
Thanks for joining us.